So a little while ago, my friend and I watched this Japanese movie called Thermae Romae. And when I started watching the movie, I was expecting to turn my brain off and just ignore all of the historical inaccuracies and just enjoy the movie for what it was. I was, however, not expecting to be in awe of the amount of historical accuracies that were actually involved in the film. The writers and the set directors, everybody who was involved seemed to put a lot of research into minor details that I think the average viewer wouldn't actually notice or really be able to see as a staple of what Roman life or what Roman bathhouses were like. But I saw them, I saw those details, and I want to take this video to applaud them. Now, this movie is no cinematic masterpiece, depending on who you ask. I quite enjoyed it. So while the plot of this film is not entirely accurate, as it involves time travel via bathtub, there are a lot of details that I wanted to point out that I think are really interesting, and again, like these, I feel like they really didn't have to go this hard with some of the details and just being this accurate for a movie that has time travel in it, but I'm really just in awe and applaud the fact that somebody took the time to not only build some of these props and recreate some of these artifacts, but I'm just impressed. And let's jump into the plot. How about? So this film is all about a Roman architect by the name of Lucius Modestus, who is essentially trying to create an amazing public bath, but he's kind of run out of good ideas and is sort of struggling with staying relevant in the current market. That is, until he gets sucked through a drain in a public bath and somehow ends up in modern-day Japan where chaos ensues. So while he is wandering naked from room to room, he is immediately interested in how these strange baths of this strange new world function. And he begins thinking of ways of how he can apply these ideas to his own designs back in Rome. Before long, he is struck on the head and is able to return to his own time. Over the next couple of months, he applies some of these new ideas to his new bathhouse and actually attracts the attention of the Emperor Hadrian. Hadrian is so impressed by Lucius's public bath design that he asks Lucius to create a personal bath just for Hadrian. But Lucius doesn't think he can do it, and as he is doubting himself, he is once again sucked into a drain and into modern-day Japan. So it seems like whenever Lucius is having a hard time getting new ideas, he falls into a body of water and ends up in modern-day Japan. This movie's a masterpiece. Slowly, we, the audience, begin to realize that Lucius always shows up in a bath around this one woman whose name is Mami, and she is an aspiring manga artist, but according to her publisher, she sucks. But she's so inspired by this naked man that just keeps showing up in bathtubs around her that she begins to write a new story. I will also use this moment to introduce the other characters, which are a wholesome group of old men who sort of act like a chorus, but honestly, they are pretty wholesome and just want what's best for Mami. Also, back in Roman times, Lucius has a best friend as well as a wife who he seems to sort of neglect, as he seems to be more invested in his work than in his relationship. And as a result, his wife ends up cheating on him with his best friend, which is fine because it ultimately allows the relationship between Lucius and Mami to blossom. But the sort of climax of this movie is that with all of the time travel going on, the timeline of Rome gets a little bit messed up as Hadrian is on the brink of choosing the wrong person as his successor to the role of emperor, instead of Antoninus, the actual historical successor. This movie, as I said before, is a cinematic masterpiece. So I've put together a quick montage for you of some of my favorite parts, and I hope really capture the essence of this film. Now that we've established that this film is a cinematic masterpiece, let's discuss the historical accuracies that I keep going on about and haven't actually said anything about yet. Roman baths were a public community area that were open in some regards to every member of society, regardless of if they were a Roman citizen or if they were a slave. In general, Roman public baths were social community areas where you could go and hang out or meet new people, have meetings, and there were actually quite a lot of different things that you could do there. There were exercise rooms, there were places where you could go and wrestle or box or even get a massage. And these bathhouses were so popular and essentially such a key part of Roman everyday life that emperors would build bathhouses in their own name in an attempt to curry public favor for themselves. So one of the first things that I want to point out in this film is just kind of a throwaway scene. We're panning over the bath as conversation is being held that helps further the plot. And in one corner we see two men wrestling. And again, this detail did not have to be included, but these filmmakers were like, you know, we're gonna make this as accurate as we can, despite the fact that time travel through bathtubs is a thing. Wrestling and boxing, as I stated before, were very common, and there were multiple different rooms where you could go and exercise or spar with other people. I'm not entirely sure if it's historically accurate that they would be right next to the baths, but I'm honestly I'm in awe with the fact that they even included it in the first place, so that's a pass from me. There is one tool that I want to point out that actually gets a proper explanation in the film, is the striggle, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but sue me. So especially with exercising, people would often oil themselves up beforehand, and this striggle tool would be used to scrape the excess dirt, oil, blood, and sweat off of their body in order to give themselves essentially a better rinse afterwards. So the movie actually does a really good explanation of what this tool was used for, and is also once again the cause of Lucius traveling forward in time. They also, for whatever reason, they talk about Roman toilets, which are frighteningly accurate to the point where I'm kind of wondering if they actually filmed this at Pompeii or Herculaneum, because the toilets themselves are identical to the examples that we have around the world currently of public Roman toilets that are still standing. Another tool that they use that is shown in the film, as shown by one man awkwardly trying to use it in one scene, is the tersoria, or the poop stick as I like to call it, as it's literally a sponge placed on a stick, and once you are done wiping yourself with it, you would rinse it out with water or vinegar, and you would put it in a bucket for the next person to use. Should come as no surprise due to the fact that these were used repeatedly by multiple people, that these were absolutely rife with bacteria. And just speaking of bacteria, one thing I want to kind of take a note on that doesn't come up in the movie is that Roman baths were not always the cleanest. Romans had a very basic idea of germ theory, and if you had an open cut or a wound, you were actually advised to avoid the baths in order to prevent infection, because the water was not always emptied regularly, and if you have half a city piling in there, it can get a little gross. I wanted to dedicate one section of this video just to how they handled Emperor Hadrian, because there's a couple little things that are kind of fun and a couple of things that honestly surprised me that they included. One thing that this film doesn't shy away from is the fact that Hadrian actually was very interested in architecture.
Thermaeとローマのあり方は似ている。安らげる場を与えてこそ人々の幸福につながる。
Hadrian designed several public works, such as the Pantheon, as well as several of his own buildings at his villa out in Tivoli. He was very fond of domes in his architectural design, which actually attracted the ire of another architect by the name of Apollodorus, who referred to them as pumpkins. However, Hadrian got his revenge when he actually became emperor and had Apollodorus exiled, so. The other major thing that I want to touch on about Emperor Hadrian in this film is I was not expecting them to show his relationship with Antinous. Hadrian did have a wife by the name of Vibia Sabina, however, it is fairly well documented that their relationship was not the most loving. And Hadrian was so fond of Antinous that even after he died a very young death along the Nile River, Hadrian had him deified. So I was quite pleased to see that it was actually included in the film, especially considering that Antinous was such a big part of Hadrian's life. So in this last section, I just wanted to talk about some miscellaneous things throughout the film that they got right, starting with Lucius's house, which doesn't seem super accurate considering his station, but it is remarked upon in the film that he's not getting paid as well as he should be, and also the fact that he doesn't have a slave present, or at least not during the plot of the film. And speaking of slaves, throughout this film we are shown slaves in various uncomfortable positions, kind of being the machines behind all of Lucius's crazy, innovative ideas. A lot of the slaves that Romans had were from everywhere. They were from Germania, they were from Carthage, they were from Britannia, they were from Gaul, they were from wherever on the map that the Roman Empire had touched. So while the majority of the slaves shown are black, this is slightly inaccurate, as you would have had a much more ethnically diverse group of people acting as slaves in Rome. Another thing that I want to talk about is the meal that Lucius is served by his wife. I have a copy of Cooking Abacus, which does contain a recipe for snails as well as stuffed kidneys. And it isn't uncommon to have either of these served at a Roman meal, but I think the fact that his wife is trying to essentially get him in the mood and trying to use these as an aphrodisiac kind of explains away the fact that these are a little bit more uncommon in general Roman cuisine, but it's still really interesting and historically accurate. And one last miscellaneous thing through this film that I noticed was in the background of any of the scenes that took place in Lucius's house, you do see a small altar. And most Roman households had one of these, as they were a small altar to the Lares, which were the household gods. Offerings were placed on this altar during different religious events, and also just as a way to help the household run smoothly. In conclusion, while this movie is by no means perfect, I do wholeheartedly believe that a lot of time and effort went into the details of this film, and I haven't really seen anybody else singing its praises. They didn't have to go this hard with the details of Roman life, especially considering they had the perfect excuse to just kind of ignore a lot of it. If something wasn't accurate, they could have just put it down to the magical element of the film, but instead they decided to add details about Roman life and Roman baths that most people probably wouldn't even notice. I really enjoyed this movie, and if you just need something kind of fun yet historically accurate to wind down with on a Saturday night, highly recommend the film Thermae Romae. I believe it's on Netflix. It does have a sequel, which I have not watched. I have a plan to watch it at some point. I'm not sure if I'll do a review on it, but if you are interested in my content and want to see more of it, please consider liking and subscribing.